So next up, we've got Walter Gross and his album Death of a Samples Man. This is his second studio album and came out on the 14th of August 2009. Now, I don't have the wax of this because this came out as a CDR, probably at about 25 copies, and he's a US producer, but it was also released later in France on cassette. The genre can sort of best be described as experimental, obviously hip-hop in there somewhere, and noise, harsh noise. There's also nods to turntablism as well. This album itself included about 7 tracks and includes a feature by fellow Baltimore artist Tension of one of his tracks from earlier on prior to Death of a Samplesman. In terms of the way to describe this album, it's raw, it's lo-fi, it's very sample based. Most of it was created on an MPC and also using samples from records obviously in that sort of standard hip hop style, but he used a very unique sound palette when putting together this album. Lots of experimental sounds despite overlapping with hip hop. Obviously lots of manipulation in terms of vinyl sounds, but then also the music concrete, field recordings, harsh noise from the Baltimore region, and it feels really gritty, really gutter, entirely unpolished, and yet the album, it really bangs. So in terms of why Death of a Samplesman, and probably more specifically Walter Gross's sound is something that's influenced the Anon Speak sound, is that he was the first artist that I remember hearing in this album specifically that combined harsh noise with hip hop, but doing it really, really well. It's probably best described as harsh noise being the sound palette and hip hop being the structure and the format. Heavily influenced by a lot of the Baltimore noise scene, and I wouldn't be surprised if he sampled a lot of Baltimore artists. Lots of turntablism and manipulation of records and sample-based production on there as well, and it's really clear to hear a lot of that in the Death of a Samplesman. He also uses a lot of hardware, so obviously the turntable, the MPC, and the lots of kind of sound effects, as in kind of, you know, guitar effects and stuff that are plugged in through the MPC and turntable, and I really love that punk aesthetic, that kind of fundamental kind of approach of not using a computer and manipulating the sounds that way, but instead external to a lot of that software. And also I love the lo-fi progressive quality of each track. Each track will include maybe up to 3 different loops, percussion loops like breaks on there, that'll then kind of fade away and then be punctuated with bits of ambient noise and stuff that kind of manipulated along the way, and then come back in and do another kind of break. He's sort of really messed with that idea of the boom bap, hip hop, kick, snare format by letting each track shift through a range of different progression points, which keeps it interesting the whole time. Because of the fact that the breaks aren't there for, you know, your 3.5 minute track all the time, it made it really interesting. So you've got these little stanzas with a break and then another stanza with a break, and each of them makes those parts more poignant because he's let them breathe and it comes back to that. Some other production, some other releases that he's got that are worth checking out are Youth Kill. This is a 10-inch that he put out under the name Youth Kill with KDI, the rapper. And this album, The Promise of Automation EP, came out around 2010. It's fantastic. Again, same sort of Walter Gross style of production, but really kind of interesting in terms of the way that he uses rappers over the top of that. And then also in 2013, he brought out this solo release, Rotorcraft, on the Small But Hard record label in the UK. Fantastic. This is where he sort of starts to move towards using his own vocals in these tracks, but instead of it being kind of rap based, it's more spoken word and sort of even singing in there as well, which he heavily manipulates through vocal recordings and stuff. So Walter Gross, all of Walter Gross's stuff is fantastic, but specifically Death of a Samplesman is available for free through his Bandcamp, so go and check that out if you're interested.